So let's move on to a team that was a very low seed last year. New Orleans making the playoffs despite being the 9 seed, the first team that was not an automatic bid and actually had to fight their way and win two play-in games, excuse me,
Yeah,
to get a playoff seed. What do you think of the Pelicans with Zion coming back and with how promising they looked at the end of last year?
man, I feel like we were just talking about Memphis, and they're like I was comfortable thinking of them as one of the weirdest teams in the league, and then we move right on to New Orleans. I'm like, this is the weirdest team in the league. I have no idea what to expect from New Orleans. I know a lot of people are really high on them. They finished the season strong after a really nightmarish start to their season. Um, they've got all kinds of pieces, all kinds of players who do really different things. They figured out
Mm-hmm.
their identity late in the season where they were, a very powerful offensive team who got just enough defense between sort of like, Herb Jones being out there and Larry Nance and Jose Alvarado picking people's pockets. And they kind of figured out themselves defensively. And now they bring in Zion, who's just is going to turbocharge their offense. Like he's just one of the scariest offensive pieces, in the known universe in terms of what he brings. Is just like the biggest source of rim pressure since Shaquille O'Neal, basically. But he's
Yeah.
also a player that's really awkward to fit into lineups and build the defense around. And their team is not built well to put a defense around him with like Jonas Valanciunas in the front court and a lot of backcourt players with some defensive deficiencies. So like I don't know. I can't wait to watch, but I think it's gonna be a wild ride in New Orleans, and I can see them depending on how Zion fits in, like being an early candidate to make some sort of roster balancing trades, or they're just gonna be like
Yeah.
super wacky, kind of like Memphis was last year, where they're gonna gut out wins in really strange ways like Jonas Valanciunas
Yeah.
and Zion hitting the offensive boards, just like sort of like Brandon Clark and Steven Adams are going to be doing over in Memphis.
Yeah, and they did one thing that's a little bit interesting is they did just recently extend Larry Nance for 2 years, 21 million.
Mm.
So they're looking at him as kind of a piece moving forward. And I think they found a lot of success in the playoffs. Brandon Ingram was really shouldering the offensive load against the Suns. But when they really succeeded and looked good against the Suns, kind of in the middle of that series where they won a couple of games and got it to a 2-2 series. I think they found a lot of success putting Larry Nance at the 5 and going small
Yeah.
um, defensively. And I think that's kind of likely going to be the way to go with Zion, because you're Valanciunas and Zion, it's an awkward fit. Like Valanciunas is kind of a 3-point shooter, but like on really low volume. He doesn't necessarily step out there, and he's at his best when he's in the paint as well. So how long are they going to stick with that? Are they going to try to move JV to the bench? Are they going to try to trade him? I don't know, but for me personally, I see the way forward as Larry Nance at the 5 with Zion.
Yeah. I think like seeing what Zion's defense looks here in, this is year 4 for Zion, but really we only have like kind of around one season worth of games to go off of.
Yeah,
And he's looked a little bit helpless on defense so far in his career after looking very promising in over at Duke.
yeah,
So how like if he can even just pull his weight defensively, I think that really changes what the Pelicans are. If he's going to
no
be
pun
this
intended.
if he's going to be this awkward like lumbering side to side guy that is very easy to attack off the dribble, I think it's going to be hard to play him in a front court with Jonas Valanciunas, who is again another guy who's challenged in certain aspects of defense. Like he's a solid drop big, but you can scramble him up a bit. So Zion's not going to help that. Larry Nance, yeah, I definitely see. I think they have a bunch of interesting potential smaller front courts they can play with guys like Larry Nance, with Trey Murphy, with Brandon Ingram.
Yeah,
The way that their coach also showed like Willie Green was pretty experimental with how he ran out Jackson Hayes in these like dual center lineups last year. So And Jackson Hayes is actually very mobile guarding the perimeter, even if he's got lots of other holes in his game that he has yet to address. Like, I just feel like every single lineup is going to be weird, so it's really hard to project that. You got tiny little shooters out there. You've got huge hulking centers with mobility issues. You've got all kinds of strange wings, from like the defensive of Herb Jones, the offensive Brandon Ingram, to like the switchability and small ball centerness of Larry Nance. Like, it's such a confusing team. And then like CJ McCollum obviously being a huge offensive focal point that was really the guy who kind of ignited them last year,
Mm-hmm.
when it sort of when they decided they wanted to make this crazy play-in push that totally worked out, and then they were the story of the NBA for a brief period of time. So I know everyone's eager for them to capitalize that, and I'm down to see it, but I really don't know how to project them. Like, they're a weird team.
I don't know if we're going to see that happen this season. I think we're more likely to see some incremental progress, and it may be rocky as they ingratiate Zion back into the offense. But this is a young team, and I do think it's an improving team. Zion is young. Brandon Ingram is still very young, 25, 26 years old.
Yeah.
He still has room to grow, and he grew last year. Last year in the playoffs was the best we've ever seen of Brandon Ingram. So
Yeah.
there's certainly like room to continue that. So my big question for you about the New Orleans Pelicans is I'm trying to think about how I want to phrase this question, because you did bring up a good point that a lot of the Pelicans roster is a bit of a weird fit. They have some specialists. There's kind of a dirty word in the NBA now. You don't want to be a specialist. You want to be a guy who can be versatile. But the most ideal supporting cast, as we all know, is a bunch of 6'7" guys that can all switch and shoot threes. But if you don't have that, I think the next best thing that you can have is lineup flexibility. And that is one thing that I do see the Pelicans having in spades. They have depth. They have a whole bunch of different ways they can play offense. With CJ, Zion, and Ingram all being offensive creators, and JV, honestly,
Yeah.
because you can dump the ball down to him and he can create a shot out of nothing. That's one way to create offense. And they just have a whole bunch of interesting role players, like Herb Jones, you mentioned, Trey Murphy, Larry Nance, Jose Alvarado.
Dyson Daniels, the rookie, as well.
Dyson Daniels could be something. I mean, he might not be ready this year, but really tall guard, excellent playmaker. Certainly a lot of potential there. So I see them as having like one of the better supporting casts in the NBA. So I was going to ask you, it's kind of the reverse way of building a team. Usually you try to find the stars first and then build the cast. But do you think that the Pelicans can kind of leverage the supporting cast to be better than Ingram and Zion would normally be ready to be?
I mean, I think we saw it last year. I think we saw that this team, with their like motley crew, um, with their ability to sort of leverage that diversity that you're describing, was the way they found a path forward. And Zion is another weird, ill-fitting piece, despite having being this mega star talent. It's kind of like, I feel it's this big equation for their coach of being like, every single player on the Pelicans brings a lot to the table and takes a lot off the table as well. So it's about kind of like putting the right combination of players out there. But I think like it's hard to see through the chaos, but I think that I think Willie Green will be able to do it. He's going to be able to, even if they just find sort of like, two big minute lineups and a couple of interesting, bench groups that really lean on the abilities of these specialists, as you described them. I think that can really raise the ceiling of this team. My big question with all the success they had late in season last year, with Zion coming back, like we all know that's going to change their offensive ceiling. But how much do you think Zion and some of his like defensive deficiencies and his awkward size and positionality, how much do you think that is actually going to complicate things for the Pelicans in terms of being able to run out all these like versatile weirdo lineups?
I think the main thing that it's going to complicate is going to be early in the season. I do have confidence that the Pelicans are going to find their groove and guys are going to figure out their roles. The one thing that I still have questions about is we saw the Pelicans have, and they lost in 7 games in a first round series. They did not
Yeah.
advance in the playoffs. And I think a lot of the ways that the Pelicans are talked about, it seems like they had more success than they did. But they did look really good against a 64-win Suns team, and that is commendable. But the way that they did that is CJ really stepping into his role as a primary playmaker. He was always a secondary playmaker in Portland behind Dame, although he did
Yeah.
play a decent amount of point guard when Dame was on the bench and he was on the floor by himself. But really becoming a point guard and doing well, and then Ingram just creating shots, pulling up over dudes and wetting it. And Zion adds a third element to that. And like, how well does Zion handling the ball and diving to the rim himself? Um, how well does the whole point Zion weapon that hopefully the Pelicans won't rely on too much, but is definitely there to be unleashed at times when it's called upon? How well does that fit along with CJ and Ingram? And we'll have to see. I'm confident that they'll figure it out. That Willie Green's a competent coach, and they can utilize all their different scoring options in a way where it makes things tough on the defense, but not still have somewhat of a system for the offense that they can have stuff that they can go to. But yeah, it is a weird team to try to figure out. That's for sure.
I think the best version of the Pelicans is like just defenses don't know what to do with them. Essentially, like, you come out and you
Yeah.
start and Jonas Valanciunas is posting you up, and then right as you make an adjustment to counter for that, CJ McCollum and Brandon Ingram start cooking, and then you try to adjust for that, and then all of a sudden you forgot that Zion exists and he's just hammering down dunks and offensive rebounds, and then like Jose Alvarado's picking your pocket, or Devonte Graham's coming in and banging threes. I think, like, they really need to embrace the chaos and hope it often tilts in their favor.